The rain had been falling since midday. By the time evening came, the dirt road outside the millstone inn was nothing but mud and shallow rivers running between the stones. The lanterns above the door swung in the wind, throwing orange light across the puddles. Inside, it was warm and loud with the sound of boots on wood floors and the clatter of clay mugs being set down on heavy tables. Della moved through it all without stopping. She was 23 years old, small in frame, with dark hair pinned back and an apron that had seen better days. She had worked at the millstone for 4 years. She knew every regular by name, knew which tables wobbled, knew when the fire needed more wood before anyone asked. She was good at her work. Not because it was easy, but because she paid attention. The inn sat at the edge of a town called Harrow's Reach. Beyond the town, past the low stone wall that marked the boundary, the land changed. The trees grew taller and darker. The hills rose steeply. That was dragon territory. Everyone in Harrow's Reach knew it, and most of them kept their eyes away from that direction out of habit. Dragons were not enemies, exactly. But they were not friends either. They were simply there, the way mountains were there. Large, old, and not concerned with human business. Della did not think much about dragons on most days. She had her tables to clear and her customers to feed. But that evening, just before the supper rush thinned out, she went to the back door to carry out a bucket of kitchen scraps. The rain was still coming down. She pulled her shawl tighter and stepped out into the narrow alley behind the inn. She almost did not see it. It was tucked against the base of the wall, half hidden in the shadow where the roof overhang kept the worst of the rain off. Small. Very small. About the size of a large dog, maybe a little bigger. Covered in dark gray scales that were pulled tight with cold. Its wings were folded flat against its back, trembling. Its head was down, chin resting on the wet stone. Della stood very still. It was a dragon hatchling. Young, very young. She could tell by the size and by the softness still in the scales along its neck. It had not noticed her yet. Or if it had, it did not have the energy to react. Then she saw the foreleg. The left one. It was twisted at the lower joint, bent in a way that did not look right. It was not a fresh injury. The way the leg rested, the way the little one held itself slightly to one side, it was clear this was something it had been born with. The leg would never work the way it should. The hatchling lifted its head slowly and looked at her. Its eyes were amber. Pale gold around the edges and darker in the center. They were tired eyes. Not afraid, just tired. Della set the bucket down. She crouched low, which put her closer to its level. She did not reach out yet. She just stayed where she was, letting it see her clearly. She had learned a long time ago that anything small and cold and hurt needed a moment before anything else. The hatchling watched her. She spoke quietly. She said she was not going to hurt it. She said it was cold out here and that could not be good. She said she had food inside if it wanted. The hatchling did not move, but its eyes stayed on her. Alert now. Listening, maybe. Della slowly extended one hand, palm open, fingers loose. She stayed still again. The rain dripped off the roof edge and hit the stones beside her. The alley smelled of wet earth and wood smoke from the kitchen chimney. After a long moment, the hatchling leaned its nose forward and touched the tips of her fingers. It was very cold. Della made her decision. She shifted forward carefully and got both arms under the little body, one behind the forelegs and one supporting the back end. It was heavier than it looked. Dense and solid, the way she imagined stone would feel if stone were somehow warm underneath. She lifted slowly, taking care not to jostle the bad leg. The hatchling made a low sound, not quite a cry, somewhere between a hum and a rumble. But it did not pull away. She carried it inside. The kitchen was bright and smelled of bread and roasted onion. Old Bram, the cook, was standing at the fire with a long spoon. He turned around and stared. He opened his mouth. Della gave him a look that had stopped arguments before, and he closed it again. She found a spot near the big hearth, away from the foot traffic of the kitchen door, behind a stack of firewood that made a kind of natural corner. She set the hatchling down gently on the flat stones beside the hearth where the heat came off steady and strong. It looked up at her. She went to the linen shelf and pulled down two of the older cloths that were used for wrapping bread. She came back and laid them over the hatchling's back and sides, tucking them loosely around without covering the head. The hatchling looked down at the cloth, then back up at her. She went to the kitchen scrap bucket, the one meant for the yard pigs, and picked through it until she found the good pieces. A chunk of cold roast that had been trimmed off the bone. A heel of bread. Some thick gravy still clinging to a clay bowl someone had left half full. She brought it all over and set it on the stones in front of the hatchling. It sniffed the food carefully. Then it ate. Slowly at first, then steadily. The roast went first. Then the bread. Then it licked the inside of the bowl clean with a tongue that was dark and narrow and precise. Della sat back on her heels and watched. When it was done, the hatchling turned and looked at her again. Then it lowered its head slowly and rested its chin on the edge of her knee. The way a tired animal does when it has decided, quietly and without ceremony, that you are safe. She sat there for a while without moving. Old Bram came and stood a few feet away. He looked at the hatchling. He looked at Della. He said, very quietly, that someone was going to come looking for that little one. Della nodded. She knew that. She was not trying to keep it. She just knew it was cold, and hurt, and alone, and that those were three problems she could do something about right now. So she had. The hatchling slept. The fire crackled. Outside, the rain kept falling, steady and soft against the roof of the Millstone Inn, while the rest of Harrow's Reach went about its evening and paid no attention at all to the small warm corner behind the firewood where something very unlikely was happening. The first sign was the sound. It came from outside, low and rolling, like thunder that did not stop. The windows of the Millstone Inn trembled in their frames. The flames in the lanterns flickered sideways. Every conversation in the common room cut off at once, the way sound dies when something much larger fills the air. Then came the light. A deep amber glow pressed against the front windows, too steady to be torches, too wide to be a single flame. It moved. It breathed. And it was getting closer. The customers nearest the door stood up from their seats. A few moved back. One man knocked over his mug and did not notice. The room had gone very still, the kind of still that happens when people are trying to decide whether to run and have not made up their minds yet. The door opened. Not slowly. Not with a knock. It opened the way a door opens when the thing on the other side is large enough that the door is barely worth mentioning. The first one through was a dragon guard. It had to lower its head and angle its shoulders to fit through the frame. Its scales were dark green, almost black, and it wore a banded harness of dark metal across its chest. Its eyes swept the room in one fast movement, the way a soldier's eyes do, looking for threats and counting heads at the same time. A second guard followed. Same harness. Larger build. It positioned itself to the left of the door without being told. Then Lord Kale entered. He was not the largest dragon Della had ever imagined, but he filled the room in a way that had nothing to do with size. His scales were deep charcoal gray, almost blue in the firelight, with a ridge of darker color running from the top of his head down the length of his neck. His eyes were gold. Not pale gold like Pip's. Deeper. Older. The kind of gold that has weight behind it. He stood straight and looked at the room. Nobody spoke. Kale's voice, when it came, was low and controlled. He said he was looking for a hatchling. Small. Gray scales. A deformed left foreleg. He said the hatchling had wandered from the Highland Road sometime before dark and had not returned. He said anyone with information would be treated with respect and fairness. He paused. He said he would also like an answer quickly. The room stayed quiet for a moment. Then one of the older regulars near the back, a farmer named Gus who had never been easily impressed by anything, lifted his hand and pointed toward the kitchen door. Every head in the room turned. Cale looked at the door. He crossed the common room in 4 strides. The customers nearest his path stepped aside without thinking about it. The kitchen door was not built for a dragon, but Cale pushed it open and ducked through in one smooth movement, the way someone does when they have spent a lifetime navigating spaces made for smaller creatures. The kitchen was bright and warm. Old Bram was standing flat against the far wall, holding his long spoon in both hands like it might be useful. He pointed, without saying a word, toward the corner behind the firewood. Cale turned and looked. Della was sitting on the stone floor with her back against the wall and her legs folded to one side. She had fallen asleep sometime in the last hour without meaning to. Her head was tilted back slightly, her eyes closed, her breathing slow. The bread cloths she had used to wrap Pip were still in place. But at some point during the night, Pip had moved. He was no longer lying on the warm stones beside her. He was lying across her lap. His chin was resting on her forearm. His good foreleg was tucked under his chin. His bad foreleg was resting loosely against her knee, and she had, without seeming to think about it, placed her other hand gently over it. Not gripping. Just resting. Like she was keeping it warm. Pip was deeply asleep. His sides rose and fell slowly. His wings were loose and relaxed against his back, not pulled tight with cold the way they had been in the alley. His scales, which had looked dull and gray when Della first found him, had a faint warmth to them now in the firelight. Cale stood in the doorway of the kitchen and did not move. He had come here expecting to find his youngest frightened. He had come expecting to find Pip huddled in a corner somewhere, cold and confused, maybe injured further, definitely distressed. He had spent the last 2 hours moving through the dark with his guard, following the trail down from the Highland Road, preparing himself for something difficult. He had not prepared himself for this. Pip made a small sound in his sleep. A low, soft rumble, the kind young hatchlings make when they are deeply comfortable. Cale knew that sound. He had not heard it in some time. Old Bram had not moved from his spot against the wall. He said, very quietly, that the girl had found the little one outside in the rain. He said she had carried him in herself. He said she had fed him and wrapped him up and sat with him until he settled. Cale did not respond right away. His eyes stayed on Pip. Then they moved to Della. He looked at the way her hand rested over the bad foreleg. He looked at the easy, unworried way she slept, as if there was nothing strange or difficult about where she was or what she was doing. One of the guards appeared in the kitchen doorway behind him. It saw Pip and made a low sound of relief. Cale raised one hand slightly, a quiet signal, and the guard stopped and stayed back. Cale moved closer. Slowly. He crouched down, which brought him closer to Della's level, and looked at Pip for a long moment. The hatchling's breathing was even. His color was good. He was not hurt. He was not frightened. He was simply asleep, the way hatchlings sleep when they feel completely safe. Della stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, the way eyes do when sleep is still pulling at them. She looked up and found herself looking directly at the face of a dragon ruler crouched 3 feet away from her in a kitchen that suddenly felt very small. She went very still. Cale looked at her. She looked at him. Then she looked down at Pip sleeping across her lap, and then back up at Cale, and her expression did what expressions do when a person's mind is moving very fast through several thoughts at once. Cale spoke first. His voice was quiet. He said she had found his son. Della swallowed. She said yes, she had found him outside in the alley. She said he had been very cold. Kale looked at Pip again. He looked at the bread cloths. He looked at the warm hearthstones and the bowl that had been licked clean. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, simply and without decoration, that she had taken care of him. Della said she had done what anyone would do. Kale looked at her when she said that. He looked at her in a way that was quiet and unreadable. Like someone who has just heard a thing that sounds simple but is sitting with the weight of it. He did not tell her that no, not anyone would have done this. But he thought it. Kale carried Pip home through the dark. The rain had stopped by then, leaving the Highland road wet and silver under the moon. His guards moved quietly on either side, saying nothing. They knew better than to speak when Kale was in this kind of silence. It was not an angry silence. It was the kind that meant he was thinking deeply and had not finished yet. Pip stirred once during the journey, lifted his head, looked around with sleepy amber eyes, and then tucked his chin back against Kale's chest and went still again. He did not seem confused or upset. He seemed, if anything, perfectly content to be carried. Like he had recently learned that being carried was not a bad thing. Kale looked down at him once and then looked back at the road. The Highland Hall was warm when they arrived. The hearth fires had been kept going by the household staff, and the inner chambers were lit with low amber light. A healer was waiting. Kale set Pip down gently on a wide flat stone near the fire and stepped back while the healer checked him over. Pip yawned enormously, showing small pale teeth, and submitted to the examination with the patience of someone who had eaten well and slept deeply and was not worried about anything. The healer said Pip was fine. Warm now. Well fed. No new injuries. The deformed foreleg was the same as always, no better, no worse. Kale nodded and dismissed them all. He stood alone in the chamber for a while, looking at Pip sleeping by the fire. The hall was quiet around him. Outside, the wind moved through the highland trees with a low, steady sound. He kept seeing it. Every time he closed his eyes or let his thoughts drift, the image came back. Della sitting on the kitchen floor with Pip across her lap. Her hand resting over the bad foreleg. The empty bowl beside her. The bread cloths tucked carefully around his wings. It was not a dramatic image. There was nothing grand about it. It was just a young woman asleep on a stone floor with his son, in a kitchen that smelled of old bread and wood smoke, in a small inn at the edge of a town that most dragons never thought about. But it would not leave him. He thought about the court. He thought about the advisors who spoke in careful voices about Pip's limitations. He thought about the long silences that sometimes followed when Pip's name came up in certain conversations. He thought about how he had, more than once, felt a complicated weight when he looked at his youngest. Not because he did not love him. He did. But love and the opinions of the world around you are two different things, and sometimes the world is louder. A human waitress in a rainy alley had not heard any of that noise. She had just seen a small creature that was cold and needed help. Kale left the hall before sunrise. He told no one where he was going. He did not take his guards. He went down the Highland Road alone, in the early grey light before the town of Harrow's Reach had properly woken up, and he walked to the Millstone Inn. The inn was quiet at that hour. The front door was unlocked. A boy of about 15 was sweeping the common room floor and nearly dropped his broom when he looked up and found a dragon ruler standing in the doorway. Kale told him, calmly, that he was looking for the waitress named Della. He said he was not here to cause trouble. He said he would wait outside if that was easier. The boy went to find her at a speed that suggested he was not entirely sure this was real. Della came out a few minutes later. She was in her work clothes, apron already tied, hair pinned back. She looked like someone who had started her morning early and was prepared for a full day of practical things. She stopped when she saw Kale standing in the road outside the inn, and for just a moment her expression flickered with surprise. Then it settled. She asked if Pip was alright. Kale said yes. He said the hatchling was well and sleeping comfortably. He said the healer had checked him and found nothing wrong. Della let out a short breath and nodded. She said she was glad. Kale looked at her for a moment. Then he said he had come because he wanted to ask her something. He said he hoped she did not mind. Della said she did not mind. He asked her why she had helped Pip. He said she had not known whose hatchling it was. She had not known there would be any reward or recognition. She had not known that carrying a dragon hatchling into her kitchen would lead to anything other than trouble. He said he wanted to understand what had moved her to do it without hesitation, without stopping to think about the cost. Della was quiet for a moment. She looked at the road, then back at him. She said it had not felt like a decision that needed much thinking. She said the little one was outside in the cold rain, shivering against a wall, and he had looked up at her with those tired eyes, and that was all she had needed to know. She said he looked cold and he needed someone. Kale said nothing. Della continued, not as if she was making a speech, but in the plain easy way of someone saying something obvious. She said she had a warm kitchen and leftover food and 2 arms that worked fine. She said it would have felt very strange to walk back inside and leave him there. Kale was looking at her steadily. She met his eyes without flinching, which he noticed. Most people did not hold his gaze for long. Not out of disrespect, simply out of instinct. She did it naturally, the way she seemed to do most things, without making a point of it. He asked her if she had been afraid. She thought about it honestly. Then she said yes, a little, at first. She said she had not been entirely sure the hatchling would not bite her when she reached out. But she said being a little afraid had not seemed like a good enough reason not to help. Kale looked at her for a long moment after that. There was something in what she had said that was both very simple and very difficult at the same time. He had spent years making decisions that involved armies and territories and the opinions of powerful creatures. He had weighed costs carefully and measured consequences before every move. This young woman had stood in a rainy alley and decided in seconds. Not because the decision was easy, but because to her, it was clear. He thanked her. He said it plainly and without ceremony, the way he imagined she would prefer. He said what she had done for Pip mattered more than she knew, and that he was grateful. Della looked slightly uncomfortable with the gratitude, the way people do when they genuinely do not think they did anything special. She said she was glad Pip was home safe. Kale turned to go. Then he stopped. He looked back at her over his shoulder and said that he would like to bring Pip to visit sometime, if she was agreeable to it. Della smiled. It was a small smile, easy and warm. She said Pip was welcome anytime. Kale walked back up the Highland Road as the morning light grew around him, and the thing that had been sitting in his chest since the night before had not left. But it had shifted. It felt less like a weight now and more like something opening slowly, the way a window opens when the latch has finally been found. The first visit was on a Tuesday. Kale brought Pip down the Highland Road in the late morning, when the town of Harrow's Reach was busy with market day and nobody paid too much attention to one more thing happening on the side street where the millstone inn stood. He told himself it was a simple outing. Pip needed fresh air. The road was good. It was not a long walk. He did not examine the reason too closely. Della was clearing tables when they arrived. She looked up, saw Pip first, and her face did the thing it had done the night in the kitchen. It opened. Not performed happiness, not the careful smile people gave when a ruler walked in. Just a real and immediate gladness, directed entirely at the small gray hatchling making his slow and uneven way across the common room floor. She came around the table and crouched down to Pip's level. She said good morning to him in a normal voice, the same voice she used with everyone. She asked him how he had slept. She told him she had saved him something from breakfast and that she hoped he liked eggs. Pip looked up at her with his pale amber eyes and made the low rumbling sound that Kale had come to recognize as contentment. Kale sat at a corner table and watched. He came back the following Tuesday. And the one after that. Within a month it had become a regular thing, unplanned in the way that regular things often are. They would arrive mid-morning. Della would find Pip and speak to him first, always, which Pip seemed to expect now and enjoy. Then she would bring Kale something hot to drink without being asked because she had noticed on the second visit that he held the clay mug for a long time before drinking and seemed to find the warmth of it useful. Small things. She noticed small things. He watched her with Pip carefully. She never treated the bad foreleg as a problem to be solved or a fact to be avoided. She did not stare at it or make a careful point of not staring at it. When Pip needed to move across a difficult surface she would simply offer her hand or her arm, steadily and without commentary, and Pip would lean on her and they would cross it together. When Pip knocked something over because his balance was off she would pick it up and move on. When Pip tired quickly, which he did, she would find him a warm spot and sit beside him and talk to him quietly about whatever she was thinking about, the market, the weather, a strange customer from the night before, small ordinary things that seemed to interest Pip greatly. She treated him like a person who happened to need a little extra help sometimes. Nothing more complicated than that. Kale sat at his corner table and felt something shifting in him that he could not name precisely and did not try to. One morning, about 6 weeks into the visits, Pip attempted to climb onto the bench beside Della. It was too high for him. He tried 3 times, pushing off with his good foreleg and scrambling, and each time he slid back. He did not make a distressed sound. He tried again with the focused patience of someone who has decided a thing will happen. Della watched him try. She did not immediately lift him. She let him work at it, which told Kale she had learned what Pip was like and what he needed. On the 4th attempt she put one hand under his back end and gave him just enough of a boost that his good foreleg caught the edge and he pulled himself up the rest of the way on his own. Pip settled onto the bench with the satisfied weight of someone who had accomplished something. Della told him well done in a voice that meant it. Kale looked down at his mug. He was thinking about a conversation he had had 8 months ago with his senior advisor, a large and careful dragon named Sorn, who had come to him with the quiet and reasonable suggestion that Pip might be more comfortable in the care of the household staff rather than in the main hall with the rest of the family. Sorn had used words like manageable and appropriate and the well-being of the court's stability. Kale had not agreed. But he had not dismissed it with the speed he should have. He had thought about it. He had sat with it for 3 days, turning it over, looking at it from different angles, letting the language of it settle into the room of his mind where serious decisions were kept. As if it were a serious decision. As if there were any version of it worth considering. He was ashamed of those 3 days. He had never told anyone about them. He had told Sorn no, firmly and finally, and the matter had been closed. But the fact that he had taken 3 days to find his way to that no had never left him entirely. He looked at Pip sitting on the bench beside Della, leaning against her arm, watching the common room with bright and interested eyes. Pip was curious about everything. He had opinions, expressed through a range of sounds and expressions that Kale was only now beginning to properly read. He liked warmth and food and being near people who were calm. He disliked loud sudden noises. He was fascinated by the way Della moved through the room, tracking her across the space when she stepped away, relaxing the moment she came back. He was a full and specific person. He had always been a full and specific person. Kale had always known that. He had loved Pip from the first day. But love, he was understanding now, was not the same as seeing clearly. You could love something and still let the fog of other people's opinions soften the edges of how you looked at it. You could love something and still, in 3 quiet days, let the wrong kind of question feel like a reasonable one. Della came back to the table and refilled his mug without being asked. She glanced at him as she did and paused for just a moment. She said he looked like he was thinking hard about something. He said he was. She did not ask what it was. She was good at knowing when a question was welcome and when it was not. She simply nodded and went back to her work. Pip climbed carefully down from the bench, with the same focused effort he had used to get up, and made his slow way across the floor to where Kale was sitting. He put his chin on Kale's knee and looked up at him. Kale put his hand on top of Pip's head. Gently. The way you touch something you are glad is there. Pip closed his eyes. Kale sat there in the warm and ordinary noise of the Millstone Inn and thought about what it cost a person to let the world tell them how to see their own child. He thought about how quietly it happened. How reasonable it could sound. How easily pride could dress itself up as practicality and stand in the doorway of your better judgment without you noticing. He had noticed now. Late, but not too late. He stayed until Pip fell asleep on his foot, which was not comfortable and which he did not move to change. Kale called the court together on a Thursday morning. It was not a scheduled gathering. The summons went out the evening before, short and without explanation, which was unusual enough that by the time the court assembled in the Highland Hall the following morning, the air in the room already had the tight and careful quality of people who are trying to read a situation before it reads them. The hall was long and stone-floored, with high narrow windows that let in thin lines of morning light. The senior members of the court stood in their places along the sides of the room. Advisors, clan representatives, household elders. Sorn stood near the front, expression composed and unreadable, the way it always was. Kale walked in without ceremony and stood at the center of the hall. He did not raise his voice. He never needed to. The room was already completely silent. He said he had something to say and that he intended to say it once. He said that his youngest, Pip, would be raised in the main hall of the Highland House, as a full member of the family, with every right and every dignity that came with that. He said Pip would be present at family gatherings, at meals, at seasonal ceremonies. He said Pip's name would be spoken in this hall without qualification and without the kind of careful pause that he had noticed, over time, preceding it in certain mouths. He let that land. Then he said that any voice in this court that suggested otherwise, directly or quietly, through words or through the slower and more cowardly method of simply arranging things so that Pip was made to feel small, would find itself without a place in his court. He said this without anger. That was the part that made it land hardest. Anger could be managed, argued with, waited out. What Kale was speaking with was something older and quieter and entirely unmovable. He looked at Sorn when he finished. Sorn met his eyes for a moment, then lowered his head in a slow nod of acknowledgement. It was not warm. But it was complete. The matter was closed in the way that only completely closed matters are, with no edges left for anything to catch on. Kale said that was all. He left the hall. He went back down the Highland Road to Harrow's Reach. The town was mid-morning busy when he arrived. Market stalls were open along the main road and a few of the vendors watched him pass with wide eyes, but no one stopped him. He had been walking this road often enough now that the sight of him was becoming, if not ordinary, at least expected. A woman selling apples nodded at him. He nodded back. The Millstone Inn was quiet. The breakfast rush had finished and the midday one had not yet begun. Della was wiping down the long table near the window when he came in. She looked up. She saw his face and whatever she read there made her set down her cloth and give him her full attention. He told her he had spoken to his court that morning. She asked what he had said. He told her. Plainly and in full, the way he had come to speak to her, without the formal layering he used with almost everyone else. He told her about the declaration and about Sorn and about the silence in the hall when he had finished. Della listened without interrupting. When he was done she was quiet for a moment. Then she said she was glad. She said it simply, the way she said most things, without decoration. But her eyes were warm and serious and he could see that she understood the full weight of what he was telling her. He told her he had come for another reason as well. He reached into the fold of the travel harness he wore and produced a small flat piece of dark stone, smooth-edged and carved with a symbol along its face. He set it on the table between them. He told her it was a protection seal. He said it was issued under dragon law and carried his personal mark. He said that with this seal, the Millstone Inn and everyone in it fell under the formal protection of the Highland Dragon clan. He said no one, dragon or human, could move against the inn or its people without answering directly to him. Della looked at the seal on the table. She looked at it for a long moment without picking it up. Then she looked at him and asked if this was because of Pip. He said it was because of her. He said she had walked into a rainy alley and picked up his son without knowing who he was or what it might cost her. He said she had fed him and warmed him and sat on a cold stone floor so he would not wake up alone. He said she had come to the door the next morning and asked first if Pip was all right, before she asked anything about herself. He said a debt like that did not sit well with him unpaid. Della picked up the seal. She turned it over in her hands, feeling the weight of it, looking at the carved mark along its face. Then she set it down carefully on the table in front of her and straightened up. She said she appreciated it more than she could say. She said it. Pip had come in behind Cale at some point during the conversation, making his quiet uneven way through the door and across the floor. Neither of them had noticed. He did that sometimes, moved through a room without drawing attention, watching and listening with those steady amber eyes. He crossed the floor to where Della was standing. He reached up. It was not easy for him. Reaching up with his good foreleg while balancing on 3 points required effort and concentration and a particular kind of stubbornness that Cale recognized because he had seen it every time Pip tried something that was harder for him than it would be for others. The small leg extended upward, reaching, and Della looked down and saw it and reached back without hesitating. She took his foreleg in her hand. Not shaking it. Not holding it like something fragile. Just holding it, the way you hold the hand of someone you are glad to see. Pip looked up at her. Cale watched this from 2 feet away and felt something happen in his chest that he did not have a word for and did not try to name. He thought about the night he had walked into that kitchen and found them. He had come there as a ruler searching for a missing hatchling. He had walked in with all the weight of his title and his worry and his complicated feelings about his youngest child. And he had found a young woman asleep on a stone floor, one hand resting over a small twisted foreleg, entirely unbothered by the difficulty of any of it. He understood something now that he had not understood then. Carrying someone home was not always about the journey. It was not always about the distance traveled or the strength required. Sometimes carrying someone home meant simply being the person who did not put them down. Who did not look at the weight of them and decide it was too complicated. Who sat on a cold floor in a warm kitchen and stayed. Della had done that. And without knowing it, she had shown him how. Pip made his low rumbling sound, the one that meant he was content, the one Cale had not heard enough of in the years before a rainy evening in a small alley changed the shape of things. Cale looked at his son holding the hand of a human waitress in a modest inn at the edge of the world. He was not a ruler in this moment. He was just a father, standing in a warm room, watching his child be seen clearly by someone who had never needed a reason to do it. That was enough. That was more than enough.